What if I told you that long before humans invented the wheel, writing, or even basic agriculture, your ancient ancestors were already conquering the deadliest, most violent oceans on Earth on nothing but bundles of grass and tree trunks? Let me explain. Think about the last time you felt nervous driving in a heavy rainstorm. You have GPS, windshield wipers, a steel cage, and heated seats, yet your heart still does a little panic dance. Now, imagine stripping all of that away. Imagine standing on a rocky shoreline, looking out at an endless horizon of freezing, churning water with waves the size of houses. You do not have a compass. You do not have a map. You do not even know if there is land on the other side. Yet, instead of turning back to your cozy cave, you tie some logs together with wild vines, push off into the surf, and decide to go for a swim. How does that even make sense? What were they actually thinking? For decades, mainstream science laughed at the idea of ancient humans being master mariners. The classic textbook image of a caveman is a slouching, hairy brute who was probably afraid of his own shadow, let alone the deep blue sea. But a series of mind-blowing archaeological discoveries has completely shattered this myth. It turns out that ancient humans were crossing deep, treacherous ocean channels hundreds of thousands of years before anyone ever thought to invent a sail. Science is still completely stumped by how they survived, how they navigated, and how they managed to pull off these impossible voyages. Welcome to the ultimate evolutionary mystery. Let us start our journey on a tiny, tropical island in Indonesia called Flores. This place is famous for a very strange reason. Back in 2003, researchers dug up the skeletal remains of an entirely new species of human. They named them Homo floresiensis, but because they stood only about 3 feet tall, the world quickly gave them a much cooler nickname: the Hobbits. These tiny humans had brains about the size of a grapefruit. They lived alongside giant rats, miniature elephants, and massive Komodo dragons. But here's the catch. Flores is an island, and it has been an island for millions of years. Even during the peak of the last ice age, when sea levels plummeted and exposed massive land bridges across Southeast Asia, Flores remained completely cut off from the mainland. To get there, you had to cross a legendary deep water barrier known as the Wallace Line. The Wallace Line is not just a line on a map. It is a massive underwater trench where the currents are so violent and deep that land animals simply could not cross it. It acted as an invisible ecological wall. On one side, you have Asian animals like tigers and rhinos. On the other side, you have Australian marsupials. For millions of years, almost nothing crossed this line. Enter Mike Morwood. He was a brilliant and rebellious archaeologist who changed everything we know about human prehistory. Morwood and his team did not just find the bones of these tiny humans on Flores. They also found stone tools that were a staggering 1 million years old. Think about that number for a second. 1 million years ago. This was long before modern Homo sapiens even existed. The hominins living back then were Homo erectus, a species we long assumed was purely land-based. Yet, there they were, living on an island that required crossing at least 12 miles of open, raging ocean. How did a creature with a brain smaller than yours manage to cross one of the most dangerous marine barriers on the planet? Did they just grab onto a floating log and get lucky? That is what some skeptical scientists tried to argue for years. They claimed it was a complete accident. A freak tsunami must have washed a couple of lucky hominins out to sea, and they just happened to drift to Flores. But does that really hold up? To start a new population on a distant island, you do not just need one lucky drifter. You need a viable breeding group. You need males and females arriving at the same time, surviving the journey, and finding each other in a new wilderness. The odds of a random natural disaster perfectly delivering a starter pack of humans to a specific island are practically zero. It is like throwing a handful of puzzle pieces into a hurricane and expecting them to land on your table fully assembled. It suggests intention. It suggests planning. But how could they plan a sea voyage with Stone Age technology? If you think the story of the hobbits is a one-off fluke, let us head over to the sunny Mediterranean. For a long time, popular culture treated Neanderthals like the ultimate evolutionary losers. They were painted as clumsy, stupid cave dwellers who got outsmarted by our direct ancestors. But that narrative is dead. In recent years, archaeologists have been finding ancient stone tools in places they absolutely should not be, specifically on the Greek island of Crete. Crete is a gorgeous, mountainous island, but more importantly, it is completely surrounded by deep water. It has been separated from the mainland for over 5 million years. This is where archaeologist Thomas Strasser enters the picture. He and his team were exploring the rugged cliffs of southern Crete when they discovered ancient stone hand axes. These were not just any tools. They were Acheulean hand axes, a style of tool used by ancient hominins like Homo heidelbergensis and early Neanderthals. The age of these tools? At least 130,000 years old. Some estimates put them even older. Let that sink in. To get to Crete, these ancient humans had to cross at least 25 miles of open, choppy Mediterranean waters. And this was not a quiet, peaceful lake. The Mediterranean is famous for its sudden, violent storms and complex currents. How did they do it? There are no forests of giant bamboo on Crete or the Greek mainland to easily lash together into rafts. They would have had to use hardwood, which is heavy, difficult to cut with stone tools, and sinks easily if not dried and prepared correctly. Why would they even try? What makes a group of Neanderthals look out at the vast blue horizon and decide that today is a good day to risk everything? Were they running out of food? Were they driven by pure, unadulterated curiosity? Think about your own life. When you go to a new city, you probably use a map app to find the nearest coffee shop. You do not like stepping into the unknown. But your ancestors did not have that luxury. They stepped into the absolute void. They looked at the sea, an environment that is completely hostile to human life, and they decided to conquer it. This was not a desperate act of survival. This was a systematic exploration of their world. Let us address the elephant in the room. The favorite explanation of skeptical scientists has always been the accidental drift theory. They love to imagine a group of ancient humans clinging to a massive mat of floating vegetation after a storm, drifting helplessly across the ocean like a scene from a survival movie. But then a team of scientists decided to actually test this theory using modern physics and computer modeling. Oceanographer Alvaro Montenegro conducted a massive study using paleoclimatic ocean currents and wind patterns. He simulated thousands of drift voyages from Southeast Asia to Australia and the surrounding islands. The results were a massive reality check. The ocean is not a friendly conveyor belt. It is a chaotic, dehydrating desert. If you are just drifting helplessly on a raft with no way to steer or propel yourself, the currents do not gently guide you to a tropical paradise. They spin you around. They pull you out into the deep, empty void of the Pacific. Montenegro's simulations showed that the success rate for accidental drift voyages was incredibly low. If ancient humans were just passive passengers on floating debris, they would have died of dehydration or exposure long before they ever sighted land. The human body can only survive about 3 days without fresh water. The scorching sun reflecting off the ocean's surface accelerates dehydration at a terrifying rate. To survive these crossings, you need to move fast. You need to paddle. You need to navigate. This means they had to have some form of propulsion. But how do you propel a raft without sails? You use paddles. But carving a functional paddle out of a solid piece of hardwood using nothing but sharp rocks is an incredibly tedious and difficult task. It requires hours of precision work. It requires an understanding of fluid dynamics. You have to shape the blade so it pushes water efficiently without snapping under the pressure. And then there is the issue of keeping your food and water dry. If you are sitting on a basic log raft, you are constantly wet. The salt water chafes your skin, creates painful sores, and ruins any food you brought with you. How did they store fresh water? Did they use hollowed-out gourds? Did they use animal skins? We do not know, because organic materials like leather, wood, and vines rot away into nothingness over thousands of years. The physical evidence of their incredible technology has been completely erased by time, leaving us with only their stone tools and their bones on distant islands to piece together the truth. To truly appreciate the scale of this mystery, we have to look at the settlement of Australia. This is the ultimate proof of ancient maritime genius. Around 65,000 years ago, humans arrived on the shores of Australia. At the time, the world was in the grip of an ice age. So much water was locked up in massive glaciers that the sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. Asia and Australia were closer than they had ever been, but they were still separated by a massive, deep-water ocean gap known as the Sahul Strait. Even with the lower sea levels, the shortest distance between the Indonesian islands and Australia was at least 50 miles of open ocean. 50 miles. That is not a distance you can cross by accident. You cannot see the coast of Australia from Indonesia, even on the clearest day. The curve of the earth hides it. This means that when those first brave pioneers pushed off from the shores of Timor or New Guinea, they were sailing toward a destination they could not see. They were sailing into the literal unknown. It was the Stone Age equivalent of the Apollo moon missions. Imagine the sheer courage that required. You are packing your family onto a fragile craft made of bamboo or bark. You are loading up whatever fresh water you can carry. You look back at your home, a place of safety and abundance, and then you turn your back on it to face a horizon of nothing but water. Why did they do it? Some researchers suggest they were following migrating birds. Others think they noticed smoke on the horizon from natural bushfires in Australia, signaling that land lay beyond the curve of the earth. But even if they suspected land was there, navigating toward it was a monumental challenge. Without a compass, how do you keep a straight line in the middle of the ocean? If you have ever been out on the open sea, you know that once land disappears, every direction looks exactly the same. The ocean becomes a dizzying, featureless blue desert. They had to read the stars. They had to read the swells of the ocean. If you watch how modern Polynesian navigators work, they do not use instruments. They can feel the direction of the island swells hitting the hull of their boat. They can read the color of the clouds, knowing that a greenish tint on the underside of a cloud means there is a shallow lagoon just over the horizon. They can read the flight paths of birds, knowing which species fly out to sea to fish and which ones must return to land at night. Did these ancient Ice Age mariners possess this same incredibly complex generational knowledge? Almost certainly. This was not primitive survival. This was highly advanced, specialized science. It was an intellectual achievement that matches anything we have done in modern times. Now, let us bring this back to you. Why does any of this matter to a person living in the modern world? Think about your own instincts. Have you ever felt that sudden, inexplicable urge to just get up and go? To pack a bag and travel to a place you have never been? That feeling is not just a random whim. It is an evolutionary echo. It is the exact same drive that pushed your ancestors to launch those fragile wooden rafts into the terrifying swells of the Pacific. Most animals do not do this. A squirrel is perfectly content to live its entire life in a single cluster of trees. A wolf pack will guard its territory and rarely venture beyond its known borders. But humans are different. We are the only species on Earth that systematically colonizes environments we are not naturally equipped to survive in. We do not have thick fur, but we live in the Arctic. We do not have gills, yet we crossed the oceans. This relentless curiosity is wired directly into your DNA. In fact, geneticists have discovered a specific variant of a gene called DRD4, often nicknamed the wanderlust gene. It is associated with novelty-seeking, risk-taking, and the desire to explore new territories. This gene variant is found in much higher frequencies in populations whose ancestors migrated long distances. You are the direct descendant of the ultimate risk-takers. Every single one of your ancestors had to survive those impossible voyages, those freezing currents, and those terrifying storms. If they had hesitated, if they had chosen the safety of the shore, you would not be sitting here today, watching this video on a high-tech screen. When you look out at the night sky today, wondering if we will ever build cities on Mars or travel to distant stars, you are asking the exact same questions your ancestors asked as they stared out at the ocean. The medium has changed, but the spirit remains identical. We are a species of navigators, forever looking for the next horizon. So, how did primitive humans cross hundreds of miles of freezing, violent oceans on basic wooden rafts thousands of years before sails were even invented. Science is still completely stumped by how our ancestors survived and navigated through deadly glacial currents. But one thing is certain, they did not just survive the ocean, they conquered it. And that same unstoppable, defiant spirit is still flowing through your veins right now.